She was the last bride, left at the border town auction. Then a broken cowboy raised his hand. Dustridge, Arizona territory. Late autumn, 1877. The sun sat low in a copper sky, casting long, dusty shadows across the heart of Dustridge, a wind-scoured border town where salvation was sometimes auctioned like cattle. Today, it was wives, and the last name left on the block was Eloise Marin. She stood in the center of the wooden platform, dress clinging to her legs, dry and sun-bleached from days on the road. Her boots were cracked, and her face held the grit of distant miles. A long, pale scar curved like a question along her left wrist, visible even beneath the worn gloves she refused to take off. She did not smile, she did not wave, she did not plead. She only watched. Men shifted, whispered. Most had already walked away. The auctioneer cleared his throat and glanced at the sky. The wind kicked up a swirl of red dust around her boots. "Last bride of the season, folks," he said, voice worn thin. Eloise Marin, 24, no known ailments, comes from Charleston, South Carolina, reads, writes. Not much of a talker, but strong looking for a girl her size. No one stepped forward. "She got a scar," someone muttered. "Looks like trouble." "She don't even look scared," said another. "Ain't natural." Still, Eloise stood straight, chin slightly lifted. Her dark hair was braided tight, and though her lips were cracked, her eyes burned with something stubborn, something no man had managed to beat out of her. The auctioneer sighed and tapped the ledger closed. "Well then, that's it. Guess I'll take her." The voice was low, flat, and came from the shadows near the saloon's support beams. Heads turned. Cass Whitlow stepped into view, dust trailing from the brim of his hat. His coat hung loose on his shoulders, worn leather scarred by years of trail work. He was taller than most, broader than most, and quieter than all. His face, mostly covered in stubble, was unreadable. He walked up the steps, pulled a folded cloth from his pocket, and dropped a stack of cash into the auctioneer's open hand. No questions, no haggling. The amount was exact. "Cass," the auctioneer said, voice dipping. "You sure? You don't. You ain't ever." Cass turned his head slightly. The look was enough. The man shut up. From the crowd, a woman whispered, "Ain't he the one that lost his wife and kid in that Comanche fire? Folks said he died with 'em. Guess not." Another added, "He lives out near Widow's Bluff, never comes into town unless someone's bleeding." Eloise narrowed her eyes, uncertain whether to step forward or step back. Cass met her gaze. He said nothing. But in his eyes, there was no cruelty. No pity either. Just a calm resignation, like someone dragging himself across another day. "Go on," the auctioneer muttered, waving a hand. "She's yours now." Cass finally spoke. His voice was gravel smoothed over time. "Come on, we ride before dark." That was it. No promises, no threats. Just an open trail, and the man who had raised his hand when no one else had. Eloise followed him off the platform without a word. Her steps were steady, but her hand lingered for half a second on the scar at her wrist. She was not afraid, not yet, but neither was she comforted. Cass helped her onto the back of his horse, saying nothing. He mounted ahead of her. The animal groaned under the double weight, then turned slowly westward, toward the dying Sunday. The townspeople watched them ride away, the quiet girl no one wanted, and the man thought to be half ghost. No one spoke as the dust settled. No one knew what to make of a vow made in silence. The trail had long since turned to dust behind them when Cass pulled the horse to a halt. Before them stood a modest cabin nestled against a slope of silent hills, far from the scattered lights of Dustridge. The land stretched wide and dark, hemmed in by fences that had not seen cattle in years. Cass dismounted wordlessly. He held the reins while Eloise climbed down, watching her with the distant gaze of a man accustomed to silence. She avoided his eyes. "House is yours," he said, motioning toward the cabin. Then he turned and led the horse toward the barn without waiting for a reply. Inside, the cabin was plain but clean. One room, a hearth with cold embers, a small bed, 2 chairs, and a worn table. A loaf of bread and a jar of dried meat sat on the counter, next to a folded blanket. Eloise moved slowly, taking it all in. She expected locks, chains, maybe a set of rules spoken in a growl. But there was none of that. Just the soft creak of wood and the faint rustle of wind through the cracks. She ate little. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and sat by the window, eyes on the horizon. He had not touched her, had barely looked at her. And that terrified her more than if he had. When the moon rose, full and bright above the trees, Eloise made her decision. She found a paring knife tucked in a drawer, stuffed it into her boot, and slipped outside. Her breath turned to frost in the air. She moved toward the fence line, heart pounding. She had no plan, no horse, but she had walked across worse. She passed the barn, and Cass stepped into view, emerging from the shadows, like he had been waiting. She froze. One hand flew to the knife in her boot. He did not reach for a weapon, did not raise his voice, just stood there, calm and steady. "You lost?" She did not answer. His eyes, shadowed beneath his hat, did not waver. "You do what you want, miss, but the coyotes out there won't wait for introductions, or care if you scream." Her grip on the knife faltered. He tilted his head slightly. "I am not your jailer. You can go if you like, but if you do, you best keep walking until the sun comes up." She stood silent, torn between pride and fear, her breath harsh in the cold. Then, slowly, she turned, walked back across the yard, past him, into the house. Cass said nothing. Later, she noticed the fire was lit in the hearth. A pot of water sat warming on the edge, not boiling, just hot enough for tea or a wash. He had lit it while she had been trying to run. She moved to the bed but did not lie down. Instead, she sat at the edge, staring into the flames. Through the window, she saw him curl up in the hay outside, back against the barn wall, blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He had given her the house, the food, the warmth, and chosen the cold ground for himself. Not once had he raised his voice. Not once had he laid a hand on her. She pressed her fingers to the scar at her wrist. Not every cage had locks. Some were made of silence. And for the first time since arriving in Dustridge, Eloise felt something unfamiliar flicker behind her ribs. Not trust, but the idea that maybe, just maybe, she could stop running. At least for tonight. The first light of morning broke through a soft haze. Frost clung to the edges of the barn roof, melting slowly as the sun stretched across the valley. The air smelled of earth, old wood, and fire smoke. Eloise rose before the rooster crowed. She wrapped herself in her shawl and stepped outside into the crisp morning. The ground was damp and cool beneath her boots. A pail in one hand, she made the short walk to the well and pulled water, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. The rhythm of her tasks steadied her heart, familiar, manageable. By the time Cass emerged from the barn, the fire was already lit, the chicken coop cleaned, and the porch swept free of leaves. He said nothing as he passed her, just nodded once. She nodded back. It was the start of something neither of them would name. Cass spent his days fixing the west fence, tending to the stubborn old horse, and hammering out new shoes in the blacksmith shed. Eloise kept to the house and garden, not because he told her to, but because it gave her purpose. They spoke little, but the silence between them was not empty. It was made of little things. One morning, she noticed a neat stack of dry firewood just outside the door, more than she could have carried alone. The next day, a loaf of bread still warm sat on the table before she had stepped into the kitchen. He never mentioned it. And when she crossed into the barn needing twine, she found the door to his small sleeping loft, always unlatched. She never went in. Instead, she mended the torn elbow of his only winter coat, replaced a rusty hinge on the kitchen window that had squeaked endlessly, poured hot tea into a cup, and left it near his tools as the sun went down. They gave, and gave, without asking or thanking. One afternoon, while chopping kindling, a splinter caught Eloise across the palm. It was shallow, but bled more than she liked. She wrapped it in a cloth and went back to work, biting her tongue against the sting. That evening, she washed the bloodied cloth behind the house, hoping he hadn't seen. Her pride ached more than her hand. Cass saw it. Didn't say a word. The next morning, Eloise found a pair of new gloves on the table. Fine leather, dark brown, with delicate stitching. The size was exact. The hide was soft, the seams recently finished. No note, no glance from Cass, who sat drinking coffee as if nothing had changed. She paused at the table, touched them, then pulled them on and said nothing either. But in her chest, something cracked and let in light. That evening, she sat on the porch, watching the sky go dark. She no longer watched for escape routes or passing wagons. She watched the trees, the patterns of clouds, the way the sun dipped behind the hills. Inside, Cass lit the fire and took out a harmonica from a small wooden box. He played slowly, a wandering tune, hollow and sad, drifting through the room like smoke. Eloise sat nearby, saying nothing, letting the song fill the space between them. When he finished, she placed a small, crumbling apple tart beside him. Still no words. But his lips twitched into a faint smile, the first she had seen. It was enough. Later that night, she wrote in a leather-bound journal she kept tucked inside her satchel. Her handwriting was small and careful, as though afraid the words might shout. He speaks less than anyone I've ever known, but every day he gives something he never names. I think I'm not afraid to be here anymore. Not because he keeps me safe, but because he lets me stay, even when he doesn't have to. She set the journal down and looked at the gloves resting beside her bed. One stitch crooked. Proof he'd made them himself. She ran her fingers over that stitch and exhaled softly. Not every gesture needed to be grand to be life-changing. Some were stitched in leather, laid on a table, and never mentioned again. The air grew heavier with every passing day. Riders brought word, distant smoke columns, bloodied wagons, farmers fleeing eastward. A rogue band had broken from the larger tribes, angry and starving, striking at the edge of white settlements. Cass began checking the rifles every morning. He cleaned them with steady hands. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. The lines around his eyes were tighter now. "Stay close to the house," he told Eloise one evening, voice grave. "If something happens, bolt the cellar door from inside. Don't come out until I do." She nodded, clutching the gloves he'd made her. That night, the dogs howled. It began with a low whistle in the wind. Then came the hoofbeats, like distant thunder rolling across bone-dry earth. Cass was already outside. Rifle raised, lantern doused. Eloise crouched in the root cellar beneath the kitchen, heart hammering. But through the slits in the floorboards, she could see flashes of fire, torches, hear the distant war cries, the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Then a silence. Then a scream. One of them, cut short. Cass's voice thundered in the dark. "Get away from the house!" Eloise froze. Her instinct told her to hide, but something deeper made her climb, slowly, up the wooden ladder. She pushed open the trapdoor and peered outside. Chaos. Flames licked at the barn. One horse had broken free, bolting into the darkness. Cass stood near the fence line, rifle in hand, breath steaming in the night air. A man charged him. Cass fired. The man dropped. Another came. Cass struck him with the butt of his rifle. Then came the boy. He couldn't have been older than 14. Shirt torn, face painted in war paint, eyes wild with grief or fury. Eloise couldn't tell. He carried a crude spear and moved fast. Cass raised his rifle again, finger on the trigger. But his arm stopped. Time seemed to stall. He stared at the boy, as if seeing something else entirely. "No," he whispered. The boy lunged. Eloise stepped forward before she realized it, out of the shadows. But Cass didn't move, didn't fire. His rifle hung slack. Instead, he reached out, not for his gun, but toward the boy. The boy hesitated, just for a second, then spun and vanished into the smoke. Cass lowered the gun completely and dropped to his knees. The attack was over. The group retreated into the hills, taking only a few stolen tools and a sack of oats. The damage was real but not fatal. Eloise helped him back to the porch. She brought water, tore strips of cloth for the shallow cut on his temple. They sat in silence, the smell of smoke still thick in the air. Then she asked softly, "Why didn't you shoot?" Cass stared into the distance. "I saw his face," he said. Too familiar, too young. She waited. He exhaled a breath like it cost him something. I was a cavalry officer. We were told to clear the valley. We burned their homes, drove out the people. One morning, we came back to the ashes, thought we'd succeeded. He swallowed. But we didn't see the children, until it was too late. Eloise didn't speak. He continued, voice gravel thick. They came back that night, with stolen rifles, and hate. We called it a massacre, but we started it. Silence stretched between them like a wound. I led that march, Cass finished. So, when I see one of those boys, all I can think is, I already killed him, I won't do it again. The fire crackled beside them. Eloise looked at him, really looked. This man, who spoke so little, who moved like he'd forgotten how to be human, he carried a graveyard in his chest. A past shaped by orders, guilt, and fire. She reached out and pressed a warm cloth to the gash above his brow. He didn't flinch. Neither did she. Thank you, she whispered, for not adding to it. Cass met her eyes. And for the first time, he didn't look away. Cass had gone to town early that morning. The sun hung low, and the wind whispered through the dry grass. Eloise stayed behind, cleaning the cabin. It was the sort of quiet task that helped her make sense of things, one sweep at a time, one folded shirt at a time. In the corner of the bedroom, beneath a faded blanket and a saddlebag, she found a battered leather trunk. It was old. The brass hinges creaked as she opened it. Inside were neatly tied bundles of letters. She hesitated. Then she reached in. The paper was worn, the ink faded, but the handwriting was steady, deliberate. Each envelope was addressed with the same names: Elena, June, Abigail, his wife and daughters. She didn't mean to pry, but her eyes caught on a page, half open, as if it had been read too many times to stay shut. She read it. Elena, I don't know how to write this, because there aren't words enough in any language. You should have never followed me west. I should have known the world out here doesn't leave room for softness, for lullabies and little girls with yellow ribbons. It was my order, I gave it. I let the fire take them, and now I walk among the living, knowing I burned with you. I tell the others I made it out. But I didn't. This land doesn't forgive, and neither should you. Eloise's hand trembled, her throat tightened. She set the letter down as if it were made of glass. The door slammed open. Cass stood in the frame, shadowed against the Sunday. His eyes fell on the trunk, then the open page, then her. His expression turned cold as steel. What the hell are you doing? She rose slowly. I was cleaning. I found the trunk. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to? His voice rose, sharp and raw. You went through my things. You read what wasn't yours. Eloise's lips parted, but he didn't give her time. Cass strode across the room, grabbed the letter from the table, and tossed it into the fireplace. The flames caught instantly. You don't get to touch that part of me, he roared. You don't get to read it like it's just some damn story. Eloise stared, stunned. You wrote it. So what? So why burn it? Because it should have never existed. She stepped closer, fists clenched. If you had the courage to write it, why not the courage to live with it? Cass looked at her, breath heaving. The fire behind him roared. This is my house, he said through gritted teeth. My ghosts. You don't get to walk in and shine a light on things better left buried. Eloise didn't blink. You already buried them, but you're still the one carrying the shovel. The silence after that felt like gunpowder in the air. Cass stormed out. She didn't follow. He didn't come back in for supper. The fire burned low. The cabin was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the stillness, after something important breaks. Eloise didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, watching the stars blink in and out behind slow-moving clouds. By morning, the wind had changed. She entered the kitchen to find a folded piece of paper on the table. It was charred around the edges. One corner had crumbled away, but the words were still there, the ones that had survived the fire. She turned slowly. Cass stood behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't speak. She didn't need him to. Instead, she touched the letter's edge with her fingertips and whispered, You didn't have to save it. He replied, almost inaudibly, Didn't save it. Just didn't finish burning it. I, too. For them, it was enough. The fire still crackled softly in the hearth. But something else had lit too. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something close. Maybe even hope. It happened in the span of minutes. Eloise had gone to the well for water. The sky was pale with dawn, and the only sounds were birds, waking, and the low hum of wind. She didn't notice the two men until it was too late. Rough hands, a burlap sack, muffled shouts. By the time Cass realized something was wrong, she was gone. The barn door was swinging open. Her bucket lay sideways in the dirt, water soaking into the earth. His heart dropped. The tracks led north, into the edge of the pine-covered hills. Cass didn't hesitate. He saddled his horse in silence, checked the bullets in his rifle, then rode like a ghost through the forest, swift and silent, a man with nothing to lose. And now, one thing he couldn't let go. He found them just past the ridge, 3 men huddled around a small camp, and Eloise tied to a tree, her face streaked with blood and dirt. Her eyes met his. She didn't scream. She didn't have to. Cass raised his rifle. The first shot dropped the lookout. The second ricocheted off a boulder, missing the man with the knife by inches. Shouting erupted. Chaos. The captors scattered, 2 grabbing Eloise as a shield. Cass moved down the slope, firing again, forcing them to retreat toward the trees. Then a shot rang out, close. Cass stumbled. His shoulder jerked back as the bullet tore through it. Blood bloomed down his coat. He didn't stop. He charged. One man raised his gun to fire again. Cass tackled him before he could. They crashed to the ground. Fists, elbows, fury. Cass got the upper hand, disarmed the man, and threw the gun aside. The second attacker lunged at Eloise. Cass saw it, and without thinking, he threw himself between them. The blade meant for her cut into his side. Cass didn't cry out. He only grunted, turned, and struck the man with the butt of his rifle. Then silence. Cass collapsed to his knees, one hand on the ground, the other clutching his side. Blood seeped through his shirt, dark and fast. Eloise rushed to him, her ropes cut during the fight. Cass, look at me, stay with me. His breath came in gasps, shallow and pained. I'm fine, he muttered, then chuckled, a dry, broken sound. That's a lie. Don't move, I'll stop the bleeding. He grabbed her wrist, weakly. His voice was soft. I thought I had nothing left to protect. Her eyes filled with tears. You do. Cass's gaze searched hers. You came into my life like punishment. Soft punishment. For the things I've done. But now, don't, she whispered, pressing her hands to his wound. But now, he continued, voice fading, I don't want to be punished anymore. She leaned closer. Then stop trying to pay for the past. He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth twitching. Easy for you to say. Maybe, she said, but it's harder to keep punishing yourself than it is to try to live. Cass blinked slowly. I don't know how. Eloise touched his cheek, gentle and firm. Then let me teach you. He closed his eyes. I'm tired. Then rest, but don't go. He opened his eyes again, barely. Promise me something. What? Don't let them turn you hard, the world, me. I won't, she whispered, if you promise not to leave me. Cass tried to nod. The pain was too much. Instead, he squeezed her hand. It was enough. Hours later, help came. A rancher had seen the smoke, heard the shots. Cass was barely conscious, but alive. Eloise never left his side. She sat beside him the entire ride back, her hand wrapped around his, whispering that she wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. Cass survived. It took weeks. The bullet had torn through muscle and cracked a rib. The knife wound had come too close to his lung. For days, fever gripped him, wringing the strength from his limbs and the color from his face. But he lived, and Eloise never left. She cooked when he could not stand, cleaned the wounds when he could not see straight, sat beside him during long, silent nights when the only sound was the rattle of his breath. She wrote new pages in his old journal, not her thoughts, but his, the words he had once been too afraid to finish. "I am sorry," she wrote, copying his old letters with care, "but I want to live." Every morning, she changed the bandages. Every evening, she read aloud, sometimes from his letters, sometimes from her memory, bits of poetry or lines of stories her mother once whispered before the dark took everything. One night, he woke to the quiet scratch of her pen. She was sitting at the table, writing by lamplight, her head bowed, shadows playing on her cheek. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, voice rough and cracked. Eloise looked up, eyes rimmed red but steady. She didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "Because I know what it's like to want to forget you exist." Cass didn't reply. He didn't need to. The silence between them spoke loud enough. From that night on, he let her read all the letters. And from that night on, he stopped adding more. By the time the snow began to melt along the edges of the roof, Cass was standing again, limping, slower, still bruised, but stronger than he had been in years, not just because his wounds had mended, but because someone had waited for him. Someone had stayed. They found a rhythm. Cass taught Eloise how to saddle a horse without help, how to shoot from horseback, how to brace her weight against the wind when it rushed across the plain. She learned quickly, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She wanted to be part of something that mattered. "You're not afraid," he told her one morning, watching her aim with steady hands. "I used to be," she replied, checking her sights. "But not of this." They built fences, chopped wood, milked goats. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. It was in the way Eloise reached for his arm when he coughed. The way Cass handed her the warm mug first every night. The way their hands brushed when passing the salt, and neither of them pulled away anymore. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in gold, Cass cleared his throat. Eloise looked up from her stitching. He reached into the drawer and placed something on the table. A hairbrush, fine wood, smooth, new. "For the hair you no longer have to hide," he said softly. Eloise's hands stilled, her breath caught. She looked at the brush, then at him. "I haven't owned one since I was a child." "I know." And for the first time in a long time, she reached across the table, took his hand, and did not let go. The wind carried the scent of dust and honeysuckle through the open fields as Eloise hung linens on the line behind the cabin. She didn't hear the horse until it was close. A stranger dismounted, a man in a pressed coat, clean-shaven, with the same pale blue eyes she used to see in the mirror. He introduced himself as her father's cousin, said he had been sent to bring her home. "You've made your point, Eloise," he said, offering a folded letter and a thick pouch of coin. "The family's ready to forget past mistakes. They're willing to pay double what the cowboy gave." Cass stood nearby, silent. The offer hung in the air like the heat before a storm. Eloise didn't move, didn't take the letter. Her hands remained still, fingers curled around the edge of the sheet she'd been pinning. "I'm not for sale," she said, her voice clear. The cousin blinked. "It's not about that, it's exactly about that," she cut in. "You think this is about worth, about debt?" She stepped forward, her boots crunching the dry soil. "I was bought once. I won't be bought again. I'm not a mistake to forget, or a stain to wipe clean." Cass's eyes found hers. "I'm not someone who was rescued," she said, loud enough for the handful of neighbors nearby to hear. "I'm someone who chose to stay." The man looked stunned, flustered, but she was already walking away. Cass reached for her hand, not timidly, but with purpose, and pulled her gently into the small gathering. He looked at the townsfolk, then back at Eloise. "I don't know what makes a man worthy," he said, voice rough with nerves. "But I know what makes a man promise." "Ah." He reached into his coat and took out a small iron ring, dark, solid, rough at the edges but smooth inside, handmade, forged by him alone. "This isn't gold," he said. "It isn't grand." She shook her head. "But it's strong," he added, "like the hands that made it, like the woman I'm giving it to." He slid the ring onto her finger. "I won't forget what I've done, but I won't live in that shadow either. I want to build something. With you. For you. Because of you." Eloise didn't speak. She kissed him. Not in private, not in secret, but there, in the center of the square, where once she had stood as an item for sale. The wedding was held 3 days later in the back field. There were no flowers except the wild ones, Eloise picked herself. No music but the birds and the wind. No guests but the handful of neighbors who brought bread and smiles. She wore the same white dress she'd arrived in. But this time, it was clean, repaired, loved. And on her face, for the first time in many years, was a smile not born from survival, but from joy. She stood beside the man who had never tried to own her, only offer her a place to belong. And when they said their vows, there was no mention of the past, only of the future. Together. If this story touched your heart, if you felt every heartbeat, every scar, every silent act of love, then don't ride off just yet. Hit that hype button to let us know you want more stories like The Scarred Vow. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of fierce women, broken men, and the kind of love that doesn't ride in with a trumpet, but stays through the storm. We've got more dust-covered romance, quiet heroes, and wild hearts coming your way, and trust us, you won't want to miss a single ride. We'll see you at the next sundown.